Well, as you can see, the opponents of free speech are capable of making a lot of inarticulate noise.
Free speech is the mechanism by which we keep our society functioning. Woo!
And by doing this, you're imposing, whoa, 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 wait, no, not cool.
I'm going to post this online that you would like people to not to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would like there to be no violence.
I'm a person of color and I felt very accommodating. There have been multiple recorded instances of trans people killing themselves because they are not being integrated into society.
If it wasn't for this law and I asked you to refer to me with they them pronouns, would you?
Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not an individual is worthy of you using their pronouns? Like if I asked you, would you please use they them pronouns for me? What?
It would depend on what I thought of your
hoops
motivation.
do you want us to jump through?
Those are my pronouns.
I think people should be able to say how they want to be addressed. I do believe that.
Well, I don't understand what the claim that there's no such thing as biological sex means, and I certainly think it's, let's call it an error, to suggest that there's some sort of scientific consensus about that. I mean, there's biological differences between males and females in animals and human beings at every level of analysis. It's not just a form of discrimination, it's a form of hate speech. That's why I made the video. I said that we were in danger of placing the refusal to use certain kinds of language into the same category as Holocaust denial, and suggested that maybe that wasn't such a good idea, especially since there's plenty of debate to be had about gender issues in our society, which I also think are also in danger of becoming illegal and quite rapidly. So it isn't clear to me how long we'll be able to have the talk that we're having right now.
I think that's a common misconception about Bill C-16, that it's somehow going to make pronoun use into hate speech. If you actually look at the provisions, we're talking about very minor amendments to the criminal code. For example,
they're not minor.
section,
They put it into the hate speech category. They're not minor at all. That's a misstatement.
On that point, I think
So
there's
don't
a lot
tell
of
me they're
opportunity
minor.
here.
That's not
There's
right.
a lot of opportunity.
So section.
Opening. I don't agree with why Dr. Peterson has been asked to stop abusing students on campus.
To stop doing what?
Abusing students.
I see.
And other members of our learning community who do deserve respect and do deserve to be able to work and learn and contribute to society in a place where if they are physically assaulted, if they are...
The assault so far came from the social justice warriors who were at this free speech rally.
But he sails really close and then right past it, and that's where he and I part ways. Because what I don't really understand is when you listen to the video, he piles a lot of things into the basket of using the pronouns that people want. And it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of his anxieties, and he talks about being fearful and anxious in his video, that somehow there's a cabal of trans activists who have so much power that they are going to basically, you know, using the pronouns that people want and capitulating to these demands.
It's not a transsexual cabal by any stretch of the imagination. Is it a cabal of radical left-wingers? Yes, it's a cabal of radical left-wingers, and they've been active behind and in front of the scenes increasingly over the last 30 years. And my estimation is that departments like Women's Studies have trained between 300,000 and 3 million radical left-wing activists, and they're making...
And they're all underpaid, so don't worry.
Well, they could pick higher paying occupations if they wanted higher paying occupations.
This is a natural evolution, and chaos will not ensue.
It's a natural evolution, then we don't need hate speech law to enforce it.
But we obviously do, because we can drive social change, and it doesn't all have to lead to chaos, is my point. And I think that, you know, we have seen the flip side of Jordan's argument, I think, has in fact, we do have a historical record of that. So when it was left to others to name people, we lost Indigenous names.
Words are tools. Maybe that was one of the great philosophical discoveries of the 20th century. And that means, and people are always looking for new tools to operate in the world. And if you invent a good tool, like a new word, then people will pick it up just as fast as they possibly can. You really see that in English. But the words that are being required now are not good tools, and that's why people aren't using them. And so instead what we have is the use of force, despite the fact that that's being denied. Although we've already established that, at least in the opinion of one of the people on this panel, I'm already guilty of a hate crime, which is what I said I was guilty of when I made that video. Steve, the issue with the law is quite straightforward. The government is requiring us to use certain language. That's not the same as not using certain language. And it's a line, and this is the fundamental issue. This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake, and it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the most extreme caution, because you interfere with people's ability to think and communicate.
People are actually suffering huge lack of access to resources that will allow people to survive. So people are being physically assaulted. People do not have counselors that they can go to, who are not going to, as Dr. Peterson has done on YouTube, recommend that they actually become more anxious and more upset about situations. People are being assaulted. I brought all sorts of really depressing stats that people who are leaning towards thinking that this is not that big of a deal, those people need to look at those stats. 58% of students could not get academic transcripts with their correct name or pronoun. That causes a huge chain of events for students or anybody who's had any kind of academic training. As everyone recognizes, we need to be able to have references, we need to be able to have resumes, we need to be able to get jobs.
Well, it's partly that, because the issues we're discussing have to center on some actual issues, and they happen to be centering on the issue surrounding transgender language. But I don't think we're talking past each other at all in a fundamental sense. I mean, I think that the real problem here is that there's a concerted attempt being made by many people to subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome. And we need more than one value, first of all, if we're going to survive as a society, because you can't solve every problem with the same approach. But there are more insidious things, in my estimation, going on underneath. I mean, even the missive that you just read said that, well, even providing me with a platform, let's call it, to express my views, is something that shouldn't be allowed. It's like, yes, that's why I made the video. It was because many people are claiming that the expression of these sorts of views should no longer be permitted. And it's this view for now, but this is a minor issue in some ways compared to the larger issue that's at stake, which is our right to have discussions of this sort at all. Like, I mean, one thing that happened right when we started this was that there was an initial claim, for example, that there's no such thing as biological sex. Well, I believe quite firmly that if we continue on our present path at the universities for 5 more years, that's a discussion we will not actually be able to have on campuses.
Because it will be...
By fiat, I mean, the legislation already implicitly presumes that biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression, which we haven't even talked about yet, vary independently. That is simply not true. I thought it was an axiom, say, of feminism, for example, that the personal was political. And isn't that that's a famous phrase, the personal is political.
Okay, but personal is political when someone is attacking you on a basis that is personal and that you can't change about yourself. That is political. And that's when people sometimes become politicized, is when they realize that no matter what they do in the world, there will be people who will continue to attack them on racist grounds, on gender and sexual violence grounds, and that's why people start to fight back, and that's why people object.
And your attempts to regulate my language use, and
I don't care about your language use. I care about the safety of the people who are being harmed.
I know people who make your kinds of arguments are always concerned with other people's safety.
I'm concerned with my own safety. Just so that people are aware, my physical, emotional life and livelihood is at risk from being here. And that's not true of everyone.
In comparison to mine, say.
I don't know about yours because
yes,
I don't live your life.
You know perfectly well about mine.
I do know that you have tenure and that's one of the major ways that you're able to do this. But I just want people to be aware that trans and gender diverse communities, and especially people of color, are being targeted and threatened physically. So free speech is a great idea and equality is a great idea, but we actually can't have those conversations when people are not even able to be present.
Jordan, let me read this tweet to you and I'll get you to respond to it because I think it's Can someone please explain to Jordan B. Peterson that there's a difference between freedom of speech and freedom from consequence? Do you agree there's a difference?
Well, certainly there's a difference.
And are you prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that.
Are you open to learning?
Well, hang on.
That's not the question.
Hang on, that wasn't the question.
It's
That's right.
true.
Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this, and that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. Now, if our society comes to some sort of consensus over the next while about how we'll solve the pronoun problem, let's call it, and that becomes part of popular parlance, and it seems to solve the problem properly without sacrificing the distinction between singular and plural, and without requiring me to memorize an impossible list of an indefinite number of pronouns, then I would be willing to reconsider my position. But I'm also partly opposed to this because it's been made mandatory and has the whole weight of the law behind it. It's like, this is a very bad idea. I believe this is a very bad idea. And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization. That's what I believe.